You walked through the front door, and you could already picture it. The bigger kitchen, the extra bedroom nobody needs yet, the driveway with space for 2 cars and a basketball hoop. The raise had finally come through, the agent called it a smart move, and the bigger house felt like the reward for every late night and every year you put in. But somewhere around the 3rd year, the math quietly turns on you. The house that was supposed to prove you made it becomes the exact reason you never quite do. And by the time the feeling sets in, most families are too far inside the decision to walk it back. So today, I want to do something that almost no one selling real estate will ever do for you. I want to show you the bigger house the way your money actually sees it. Not as a milestone, not as an investment, but as the largest, slowest, most socially approved wealth transfer of your entire adult life. Because for the average American household in 2026, upgrading to a bigger and more expensive home isn't just one financial mistake among many. It tends to be the decision that swallows all the others. Let me start with the number everyone fixates on, because that number is a trick. When you shop for a home, the price tag is what you negotiate, what you stress over, what you compare across listings. As of this spring, the median existing home in the United States sold for $417,700, according to the National Association of Realtors. With a 20% down payment and a 30-year rate sitting around 6.5%, where Freddie Mac has had it parked for most of 2026. The principal and interest alone run about $2,125 a month. That eats roughly a quarter of the typical family's monthly income, based on the median family income of $106,800 that the Department of Housing and Urban Development reports for the year. So even the average house, at the average rate, is already a serious monthly commitment for the average family. Now picture the upgrade. A couple I'll call Marcus and Renee are sitting in that median house, and they decide they've outgrown it. They want the bigger yard, the dedicated office, the open concept everything. The new place is $700,000. To most people, that feels like a $282,000 difference. A big jump, sure, but a one-time jump. You sign the papers once, and that is the trick. The purchase price is the smallest cost a bigger house will ever charge you. Think of it as the cover price on a subscription you can't cancel, billed monthly for decades. Watch what actually happens to Marcus and Renee's monthly life. On that $700,000 home with the same 20% down and the same rate, principal and interest climb to about $3,540 a month. So the bigger house adds roughly $1,400 every single month before they've turned on a light or paid a tax bill. Over the 30-year loan, that gap alone is more than $500,000 in extra payments. And almost none of those early dollars touch the principal, because in the first decade of a mortgage, you're mostly buying the bank's interest, not the house. Marcus and Renee will spend years paying thousands more a month while their actual ownership of the place barely moves. But the mortgage is only the part you can see. The truly dangerous costs are the ones that hide inside the square footage, and they all share one quiet feature. They scale. I need you to throw out the idea of home ownership as a fixed monthly payment, because it was never. Bankrate's Hidden Costs of Home Ownership study put the average annual expense of owning and maintaining a typical single-family home on top of the mortgage at $21,400. A separate analysis from Zillow and Thumbtack late last year landed at $15,979 a year, which works out to about $1,325 every month, layered on top of whatever you property taxes, insurance, utilities, internet, and the endless maintenance a house demands just to keep standing. Whichever study you trust, the message is the same. The mortgage was never the whole bill, it was the part they showed you. And every one of those costs is tied to the size and value of the house. A bigger home doesn't cost a little more to run. It costs more in every category at once, and the increases stack on top of each other. Property taxes are charged as a percentage of assessed value, So the more expensive house is taxed harder every year forever, and that bill climbs as the assessment climbs. Across the country, property taxes rose by an average of around 12% between 2021 and 2023 alone, according to the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, and a higher value home feels that increase on a bigger base. Homeowners insurance is priced on the cost to rebuild, so more square footage means more to insure, and premiums have already surged nearly 57% between 2019 and 2024 by the same Harvard analysis. In some states, the insurance market has gotten so brutal that owners of large homes are getting dropped or repriced overnight. Utilities scale with the volume you're heating and cooling, so those extra rooms cost money on the days nobody walks into them. And then there's maintenance, the cost almost everyone underestimates, and the one that punishes size most brutally. The rule of thumb professionals use is that maintenance runs 1 to 2% of a home's value every year. On the median home, that's somewhere between $4,000 and $8,000 annually, on average, indefinitely. On Marcus and Renee's $700,000 house, the same 1.5% is more than $10,000 a year, every year, in roofs and water heaters and FAC systems, and the thousand small failures of a structure built from wood. The home maintenance research from Pearl pegged the actual average homeowner's maintenance spend at around $8,800 a year, more than double the old 1% rule people like to repeat. A bigger house simply gives the entropy more surface area to work on, more roof to leak, more square footage of floor to replace, more systems to fail at the worst possible time. So stack it up honestly. The extra $1,400 in mortgage, the extra few hundred a month in taxes and insurance and utilities on the higher value home, the extra few thousand a year in maintenance. When you total it, Marcus and Renee's upgrade doesn't cost them $282,000 once. It costs them somewhere around $1,500 more every single month for the rest of their working lives. That quiet monthly leak is the entire ballgame, because that money had another future. Picture that leak the way it actually shows up in their life. It's not a single dramatic bill they could brace for. It's a slightly higher mortgage draft, a property tax statement that stings a little more each year, an insurance renewal that quietly climbs, a power bill that runs heavier in July and January, and a steady drip of repairs that never seem to stop arriving. None of it feels catastrophic in any given month. Each piece is absorbable on its own. That's exactly why it's so dangerous. A cost you can always just barely absorb is a cost you never fight. And a cost you never fight will follow you for 30 years and quietly empty the account you were supposed to retire on. Let me show you the future that money has, because this is the part that turns a bad decision into a tragic one. That extra $1,500 a month is not gone. It's spent. The difference between spending and losing is whether the dollar could have grown. And invested instead of buried in walls, that dollar grows in a way that's almost hard to believe until you see it laid out in front of you. The S&P 500 has returned roughly 10% a year on average across a figure both Fidelity and JP Morgan anchor their long-term planning around. Fidelity's own 30-year measure through the end of 2025 came in just above 10%. So take Marcus and Renee's $1,500 a month, the precise amount the bigger house quietly cost them, and put it in a low-cost index fund instead. At that historical average, after 30 years, it becomes more than $3 million. Sit with that for a second. The choice between the median house and the upgrade was never really a choice between two homes. It was a choice between a comfortable retirement and a seven-figure one. The bigger house didn't cost Marcus and Renee $282,000. It cost them more than $3 million in the life they could have funded, and they handed it over $1,500 at a time, cheerfully, feeling like they were winning. Before anyone writes in the comments that 10% is optimistic, That's fair. Let's be conservative and use the inflation-adjusted return, the one that already strips out the rising cost of living, which sits closer to 7%. At that rate, the same $1,500 a month still grows to north of $1.5 million over the same 30. The bigger house, in real purchasing power, still costs them a fortune they will never see because they're living inside it. There's an old shortcut for this called the Rule of 72. Divide 72 by your expected return to find how many years it takes your money to double. At 10%, money doubles roughly every 7 years. Remember the down payment? Marcus and Renee put an extra $56,000 of cash into the bigger house just to clear the 20% on a $700,000 home instead of a $420,000 one. That $56,000 left in the market would have doubled to over $100,000 by year 7, past $200,000 by year 14, approaching $1 million by retirement, all on its own, without another dollar. Instead, it's frozen in drywall, doing nothing but appreciating at a rate that after costs barely beats inflation. That's the opportunity cost, and it's invisible because you never see the money you didn't make. There's no bill for it, no alert on your phone, no moment where someone hands you an invoice for $3 million. The wealth simply fails to exist quietly for 30 years, and you feel nothing at all until the day you finally do the math and understand where. Now let me hit you with the strangest part of this whole story, because it exposes how irrational the bigger house instinct really is. We are buying more and more space for fewer and fewer people. Go back to the early 1970s. The median new single-family home in America was about 1,500 square feet, and the average household held a little over 3 people. That's roughly 477 square feet per person. By 2020, the median new home had grown to more than 2,300 square feet, while the average household shrank to about 2.5 people. Do that division, and you get around 920 square feet per person, according to Census Bureau data. In 2 generations, Americans roughly doubled the amount of house each person occupies, even as families got smaller. Sit with what that means. We are heating, cooling, cleaning, insuring, taxing, and maintaining nearly twice the space per human being that our grandparents did for households that hold fewer humans. The formal living room nobody sits in. The guest room used 4 nights a year. The bonus room that became a storage unit you happen to pay a mortgage on. Builders even quietly admit the squeak. New homes have started shrinking again, down to around 2,400 square feet, the smallest in 2 decades, according to Realtor.com. And the reason isn't that families suddenly wanted less, it's that they can no longer afford more. The cost per square foot on a new home has jumped more than 50% over the last decade. So people are buying less space and paying more for each. So when you upgrade for the space, sit with the uncomfortable question. Space for what? For whom? For how many hours a week? Most of the extra square footage in a bigger house isn't lived in. It's owned. And owning costs money whether or not you ever walk through the. A lot of the upgrade pressure hides behind the kids, so let me say the quiet part plainly. The belief that every child requires a dedicated bedroom, that a growing family means a bigger footprint by default, is a fairly recent and fairly American idea. For most of human history, and across most of the world today, children shared rooms and turned out completely. The 4-bedroom house for the family of 3 isn't built around what the children need. It's built around what the parents feel they're supposed to provide. There's nothing wrong with wanting space for your kids, but be honest about whether you're buying a childhood or buying a status symbol with a crib in it, because the mortgage doesn't care about the difference. And the compounding you give up will be the same money that could have paid for their college, their first car, the head start you actually wanted to give them. The extra bedroom they barely use can quietly cost them the inheritance you meant to leave. There's a second name I want to put next to Marcus and Renee, because the contrast is the whole lesson. A woman I'll call Tasha earns almost exactly what. When her income climbed, she didn't trade up. She stayed in a modest 3-bedroom, kept her payment well under a quarter of her take-home, and set the rest to invest automatically the day after every payday. Her house is smaller, her car is older, her kitchen has never once been featured on anyone's feed, and she will retire with more money than the couple in the bigger house will, not because she earned more, but because she refused to let her home set the size of her life. Hold Tasha in your mind, because she's where this is going. That leads straight into a cost that doesn't show up in any study, because it happens after you move in. The bigger house demands to be filled. An empty $700,000 house looks wrong, and you feel it the first night you sleep there. The furniture that fit the old place looks small and lonely in the new rooms. The walls are bare. The extra bathroom needs everything a bathroom needs. So you furnish. You decorate. You buy the sectional that fills the great room. The dining set that suits the formal dining room you'll use twice a year. The patio furniture for the bigger yard. The second lawnmower. The rugs. The window treatments that somehow cost more than your first car. One analysis of first-year home ownership costs, counting furnishings and renovations, ran past $86,000. A bigger house has more rooms asking to be filled, and the asking never really stops. This is lifestyle inflation wearing a hard hat. The house raises the floor on everything around it. A bigger home in a nicer neighborhood comes with nicer neighbors, nicer cars in the driveways, nicer landscaping, and a slow gravitational pull to match all of it. The grill gets upgraded. The kitchen gets redone because everyone else's kitchen got redone. The lifestyle expands to fill the container you bought, and the container you bought was enormous. Now let me show you a cost that gets people who upgrade more than once, because almost nobody upgrades just one time. Every time you buy and sell a house, you pay a toll, and that toll is enormous. Selling a home typically costs around 6% of the sale price once you account for agent commissions. And that's before closing costs, transfer taxes, and the repairs buyers demand on the way out. Add the costs of buying the next place, and a single move can vaporize close to 10% of a home's value in pure friction, money that doesn't go to you, the bank, or your equity. It just evaporates into the transaction. Now think about how people actually live. They don't upgrade once. They upgrade in their 30s for the kids, then again in their 40s for the bigger kids, then talk about upgrading once more when the promotion lands. Each move resets the mortgage clock back to year one, where almost all of the payment is interest again, and each move skims another chunk off the top in transaction costs. A family that upgrades 3 times over their career can easily hand over a 6-figure sum just in fees and commissions, on top of everything else, while never quite escaping the early interest phase of any loan. The treadmill doesn't just keep them running, it charges admission every lap. Let me show you the trap that catches the people who can technically afford the bigger house, which is most of the people watching this. The bank's approval letter doesn't tell you the most important thing. Qualifying for a payment is not the same as being able to live underneath it. The lender approves you based on your income today on the best month with no emergencies. They don't model the layoff, the medical bill, the year the furnace and the roof decide to fail in the same season. They approve the maximum, and the maximum becomes the trap, because the maximum is exactly the number that leaves you no room. When you stretch into the biggest house you qualify for, you become what people call house poor. On paper, you have a beautiful home and a respectable income. In reality, your money is spoken for before it even arrives. The Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies found that around 24% of all homeowners are now cost-burdened, spending more than 30% of their income just on housing. And the number of cost-burdened owners jumped by more than 600,000 in a single recent year. More than 20 million American households own a home, and are quietly being crushed by it. That's the cruelest feature of the bigger house decision. It doesn't fail loudly. There's no foreclosure notice for the family that's simply tight every month that can't max the retirement account. That puts the broken transmission on a credit card because the house ate the savings. They look successful from the street. The neighbors assume they're doing great. And they sit one bad quarter away from a real crisis with no cushion underneath them because the cushion became the mortgage. Margin is the entire point of money, and a bigger house is engineered to consume. A family in a modest home with a manageable payment has slack in the system. They can absorb a shock, take the lower-paying job they actually want, invest the difference automatically, and sleep through the night. A family in the biggest house they qualified for has none of that. Every dollar already has a job, and the job is the house. They've traded their financial flexibility for square footage, and flexibility, not square footage, is the thing that actually makes a person free. There's a quieter tax on top of the financial one, and people underrate it constantly. A bigger house costs you time, more rooms to clean, more yard to mow, more gutters to clear, more systems to monitor, more stuff to manage, more space that pulls your weekends into upkeep instead of living. The dream was that the bigger house would give you a better life. For a lot of families, it just hands them a second unpaid job they happen to sleep inside of. And it costs you something even more valuable than weekends. It costs you the ability to walk away. When your monthly nut is large, you can't take the pay cut to start the business you keep thinking about. You can't leave the manager who makes you miserable because the next job offers less and the mortgage doesn't negotiate. You can't take 3 months off when a parent gets sick or absorb the season when work dries up because the house needs feeding every 30 days no matter what your life is doing. A big mortgage quietly locks both partners into their highest paying, highest stress jobs for as long as the loan exists, which is most of their working lives. People call that golden handcuffs in the corporate world. A bigger house is the same handcuffs, except you signed up for them at closing and called it the American dream. The smaller house, by contrast, buys you options, and options more than square footage are what wealthy people are actually buying when they look like they're playing it safe. If this is landing for you, take a second to subscribe because I break down exactly these kinds of money decisions every week. The ones that look completely normal and quietly cost you everything. Now let me take apart the two arguments people use to defend the upgrade because they sound smart and they both cost real money. The first argument is that a house is forced savings, that the bigger mortgage forces you to build equity you'd otherwise blow. There's a sliver of truth in it, which is exactly what makes it. Yes, paying down a mortgage builds equity, but forced savings at a terrible return is still a terrible return. In the early years of that 30-year loan, the overwhelming majority of every payment is interest, not principal. You're not saving in those years. You're renting money from the bank at 6.5% and calling the small leftover sliver safe. Set that next to the same money invested at the market's long-run average, and the forced savings argument falls apart. You build far more wealth by saving deliberately into investments than by overpaying a bank for the privilege of a bigger box. The second argument is the big one. It's an investment. Real estate always goes up. And the numbers get genuinely uncomfortable for the bigger house crowd right here. Yes, homes appreciate, but the headline appreciation number is a lie of omission because it never subtracts the costs you paid to hold the thing. Strip out the property taxes, the insurance, the maintenance at 1 to 2%, the mortgage interest, and the transaction fees that take 6% of the sale price on the way out, and the inflation-adjusted return on a typical American home over the long run is far thinner than people imagine. One 25-year analysis comparing a median home against an S&P 500 index fund found the home delivered around 5% a year in real terms, while the stock investment after inflation. Ran in the same neighborhood but without the roof repairs, the property tax bills, or the broker's commission eating the gains along the way. Notice the sleight of hand buried in that it's an investment line. When someone says their house made money, they almost never mean the bigger house specifically made more money than a smaller one would have. A bigger house ties up more of your capital to capture the same percentage of appreciation while charging dramatically higher carrying costs the entire time you hold it. The appreciation is roughly proportional. The costs are brutally proportional. So per dollar invested, the bigger house is a worse investment than the smaller one, not a better one. You've simply made a bigger bet on the same horse at a worse price after paying a higher entry fee. There's also the liquidity problem, and this is the one that quietly ruins retirements. The wealth locked in a house is trapped. You cannot spend a kitchen. You cannot sell the spare bedroom to cover a medical bill. When markets fall or life changes fast, an index fund can be partially sold in an afternoon. But a house has to be listed, staged, shown, negotiated, and sold whole, often at the worst possible moment, with a slice handed to agents on the way out the door. I've watched people reach retirement looking rich on paper, sitting on a paid-off 5-bedroom house with almost nothing liquid to their name, forced to either sell the home they love or borrow against it in their 70s just to fund the life they assumed the house would provide. House rich and cash poor isn't wealth. It's wealth wearing a costume. There's one more objection worth answering, because it's the one people cling to when the numbers get scary. They tell themselves they'll just refinance when rates drop. Buy the big house now at 6.5% and fix it later when the Federal Reserve cuts. The trouble is that nobody can schedule that rescue. Housing economists no longer expect mortgage rates to fall below 6% in the near future. And forecasts from groups like the Mortgage Bankers Association have rates hovering in the mid-6% range for years. Even if rates do drift down, refinancing isn't free. It carries its own closing costs, and there's a cruel twist hiding inside it. When rates fall, prices and demand tend to rise, so the cheaper monthly payment often gets handed to the next buyer through a higher price. Not to you through real savings. Buying more house than you can comfortably carry today on the hope of a rescue you can't control isn't a plan. It's a bet made with the largest sum of money you'll ever borrow. So why do we keep doing it? If the math is this lopsided, why does nearly every family that gets a raise immediately go shopping for more house? The answer isn't financial at all. It's psychological, and it's worth understanding because it's the part you can actually control. A bigger house is the most visible way to signal that you've succeeded. A larger investment account is invisible. Nobody drives past your brokerage balance and slows down to admire it, but everyone sees the house, the address, the driveway, the square footage glowing on the listing. We are wired to compete for status with the people right around us, and housing is the one scoreboard we can't hide. When your income rises, the bigger house feels less like a decision and more like the obvious next step, because that's what success is supposed to look like, and because the people you now spend your weekends with all live in one. That's the neighborhood ratchet, and it only turns one direction. You move up, and the baseline quietly resets. The modest house you'd have been thrilled with 5 years ago suddenly feels like a step backward, not because anything about it changed, but because your reference point moved. So you stretch, and the stretch feels normal, because everyone around you stretched too. The entire system runs on an unexamined assumption that more space equals a better life. And the data on how little of that space we actually use says the opposite. Let me give you the reframe that changes everything, and it's the furthest thing from deprivation. The people who build real wealth are usually not the ones in the biggest houses. They're the ones living in a house that's a little smaller than they could afford, pocketing the enormous difference and putting it to work for decades. The modest house was never the consolation prize. It's the whole strategy. Put the two stories side by side and watch them diverge in slow motion. Marcus and Renee buy the $700,000 house. Tasha keeps the modest one and invests the gap. In year one, you genuinely cannot tell who made the smarter move, and honestly, the bigger house looks like the winner. It's gorgeous. The housewarming is incredible. Tasha's place looks ordinary by comparison, and a few people quietly wonder why she didn't level up when she clearly could have. That first year, the bigger house wins on every visible measure. Fast forward 5 years. The cracks start showing, though only Marcus and Renee can feel them. The water heater went, the deck needed resealing, property taxes crept up with the assessment, and the insurance renewal came in higher than last year. Again, they're technically, but there's never quite anything left at the end of the month, and the retirement account looks thinner than it should for two people earning what they earn. Tasha, meanwhile, has been quietly funneling that $1,500 a month into index funds without thinking about it, and her account has crossed $100,000. Nobody's congratulating her. Nobody can see it. Now jump to year. This is where the slow motion collision finishes. Marcus and Renee have a beautiful, well-worn house and a retirement account that worries them at 2 a.m. They've poured tens of thousands into maintenance, watched insurance and taxes climb every single year, and the equity they do have is locked inside walls they can't. They look successful, and they feel trapped, and they cannot fully explain why, because on paper they did everything right. Tasha is sitting on an investment account in the high 6 figures, climbing towards 7, with a paid-down modest home on top of it. She can retire early if she wants. She can help her kids without flinching. She has choices in every direction. From the street, Marcus and Renee still look like the ones who won. From the bank statement, it was never close. The difference between those two outcomes wasn't income, because the incomes were nearly identical. It wasn't some heroic act of discipline. It came down to one decision made once, sometime in their 30s, about how much house to buy. That single choice quietly set the trajectory of everything that came after it. Tasha didn't get rich by being smarter or luckier. She got rich by refusing to let her home decide the size of her life. This is why I call the bigger house the #1 wealth killer, and I mean it literally, not as a turn of phrase. The thing draining your future isn't the daily coffee, the streaming subscriptions, or the small stuff the budgeting apps love to scold you about. The biggest financial decision most people ever make is how much house to buy. And getting it wrong doesn't cost you a little. It costs you the compounding of the largest recurring expense in your life, multiplied across decades. No other ordinary decision moves the needle this far in the wrong direction, and almost no one feels it happening until the future they traded away has already failed to show up. So what do you actually do with all? You don't take a vow of poverty or move into a shoebox. The move is simpler and a great deal more freeing than that. Buy the house that fits the life you actually live, not the one you think you're supposed to perform for other people. Run the real monthly number before you let yourself fall in love with the all-in number: mortgage plus taxes plus insurance plus an honest maintenance budget of 1 to 2% of value, and then ask whether that figure still leaves you room to invest meaningfully every month. A reasonable target most planners point to is keeping that total housing cost under about 1/4 to 1/3 of your take-home pay, and the closer you sit to the bottom of that range, the more of your income is free to compound somewhere it can actually grow. If the all-in number crowds out your investing, the house is too big, no matter what the bank approved you for. The bank is not your friend in this decision. The bank profits when you borrow the maximum. Your job is to borrow the amount that leaves your future intact. Watch out for the phrase that sells more square footage than any agent ever could. You'll grow into it. People buy the bigger house for the life they imagine arriving later, the bigger family, the entertaining they'll do, the relatives who will visit. Then the imagined life mostly doesn't show up the way they pictured, and they're left paying every month for rooms that were built for a hypothetical. Buy for the life you're actually living right now, plus a sensible bit of margin, not for a fantasy version of the next decade. You can always buy more house later if the real need genuinely appears. You can't get back the years of compounding you spent heating empty rooms while you waited for a future that took its time. When the raise lands, fight the reflex to immediately convert it into bank the difference instead. Let the smaller home and the growing investment account do the quiet work that nobody will ever compliment you on. The work that makes you, 20 years from now, the person everyone else quietly wonders about. Automate the gap so it leaves before you can feel it, the way Tasha did, and let the boring magic of compounding turn your restraint into the kind of freedom a bigger house can never buy. And if you're already in the bigger house, you are not stuck and you have not failed. You simply have better information today than you had on the day you signed. Maybe that means staying put and never upgrading again. Maybe it means right-sizing down the road and freeing the trapped equity to finally go to work. Maybe it just means being honest about the true cost so you can build margin into everything else around it. Plenty of people in their 50s unlock a fortune simply by trading the 4-bedroom they no longer need for something smaller and discovering the freedom that was hiding in the difference all along. The point was never guilt. The point is that you can see the machine now, and once a person can see it, they stop feeding it by accident. Because watching how money behaves over a lifetime teaches you one thing above all. Almost every major financial mistake people make, the bigger house, the financed car, the lifestyle that grows faster than the paycheck, traces back to the same root cause. Nobody ever taught them how money actually works, not in school, not at the kitchen table, and certainly not before the decisions that mattered most. They ended up learning the rules of personal finance only after they'd already broken the important ones, the way you might finally read the instructions after you've already lost the game. If watching this gave you that uneasy flicker of recognition, that quiet sense that you've been making enormous decisions without the full picture in front of you, then the most useful thing you could do next isn't to memorize this one lesson about houses, it's to go back and build the foundation that sits underneath all of it. I put together a full breakdown on financial literacy, the real fundament, the way money grows, the way costs compound, the way these big decisions connect to one another, and it's the video I'd point any person toward before they make a single major money move. Everything we covered today, the opportunity cost, the scaling expenses, the gap between looking wealthy and being wealthy, all of it rests on those fundamentals. Start there, and decisions like the bigger house stop being traps that close on you and start being choices you make with your eyes wide open. The bigger house was never the reward you thought it was. The reward is the freedom waiting on the other side of not needing it.